I like this episode, but truthfully, I prefer the sequel, Scream Ultimate Computer Scream. This is a review of the Star Trek The Original Series episode, The Ultimate Computer. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know why you shouldn't use your brain as the model for a supercomputer if you're on the precipice of a nervous breakdown after carrying decades of secret resentment and stress and obsession to prove yourself at any cost, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, let the review begin. The Enterprise has been summoned to a space station, and most of the crew ordered off the ship without explanation, and Captain Kirk is pissed. This guy, Commodore Wesley, an old friend of Kirk's, beams over to explain. The Enterprise has been chosen to test the revolutionary new M5 computer, designed by the super genius Richard Daystrom. Spock's like, hey, the M5, the most advanced computer ever created, powerful enough to control an entire starship all by itself. Commodore Wesley's like, yeah, how do you know so much about it? And Spock's like, I'm smart and I read stuff. The M5 is going to take control of the Enterprise during a series of war games drills to test its capabilities. Dr. Daystrom himself will install the computer and supervise the tests. Only 20 Enterprise crew members will be on the ship. Everyone else will be offloaded to the space station. Kirk's like, I don't care for that. But Commodore Wesley's like, it'll be fine, Jim. Just lie back and let the machine do all the work. You know, like when that sex bot did you cowgirl style on Tregulax 5. Remember? At my wedding reception? After the credits, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy head down to engineering, where Daystrom is finishing up the install of the M5. Kirk greets Daystrom like, Prince Mamualde, glad to see you finally got out of that tomb. How's your wife? Oop. Spock tells Daystrom he's a big fan of his work, and McCoy says, I just hope your fancy Dan computer doesn't end up killing us all. Kirk says, hey, I have a question. Why is your computer called the M5 and not, I don't know, the M1? Daystrom's like, well, you see, M's 1 through 3 were sabotaged and destroyed, and M4 mysteriously vanished without a trace. Spock remains in engineering to help Daystrom complete the setup of M5, and McCoy and Kirk exit to the corridor. McCoy's like, I think Spock wants to fuck that computer, man. Kirk says, something's wrong about that computer. I can't say exactly what, but it feels dangerous. Then again, maybe I'm just afraid of losing my job to a computer. I don't know. What do you think, Bones? McCoy's like, I wish you'd just work it out for yourself and leave me alone. The first test for the M5 is not a battle simulation, but a planetary survey. With the computer hooked up and running the show, the Enterprise approaches a planet, enters orbit, and conducts a scan of the surface. Spock conducts a scan of his own, which ends up matching M5's exactly. Captain Kirk makes recommendations for a landing party to explore the planet, and then, at Daystrom's request, they ask M5 for its landing party recommendations, which differ from Kirk's in two key ways. First, M5 assigns a different geologist to the team than Kirk, a less experienced officer whose service record indicates they visited this planet before. Second, M5 does not recommend that Captain Kirk or Dr. McCoy join the landing party. Why? Non-essential personnel. Ouch! Shots fired. Well, not yet. That's coming up. Scotty notices that M5 has been shutting down systems all over the ship in order to draw more power for itself, but I'm sure that's nothing to worry about. Daystrom's like, it's fine. When M5 is tasked with more work, it draws more power so it can do that work. It's no different than when you slam a 5-hour energy so you don't fall asleep after lunch. 2 Starfleet ships show up for an unscheduled war games drill, the Excalibur and the Lexington, which is personally commanded by Commodore Wesley. Despite being outnumbered, the Enterprise, controlled by M5, makes light work of the drill, winning the simulated battle handily. Daystrom's like, how about that, huh? How about my computer kicking all that ass just now? The bridge crew seems less than impressed, probably because they had nothing to do but sit there and watch the ship fly itself around. The one somewhat surprising reaction comes from Spock. He reports that the M5 adjusted much faster and more efficiently than the human crew could have, but then Spock, who has been incredibly supportive of Daystrom and the M5 up until now, says, as impressive as it is, I don't find it desirable to have the M5 control the ship. Computers make excellent servants, but I don't want to serve under one. Starships run on loyalty. Loyalty to the captain, and that's you. You have my loyalty, my devotion, professionally, and also personally, but in a friendly way. You're the one I want to report to, not some computer. Yours is the face I want to see when those automatic doors open. Your voice is the one I want to hear calling me to the bridge or the transporter room. You're the one I want to talk to and learn with and grow with and stand next to on the bridge of this starship as we explore this great big universe together for the rest of our lives in a totally platonic way. Commodore Wesley contacts the ship and says congratulations to the M5 unit for an excellent demonstration, and my regards to Captain Dunsel. That hurts Kirk's feelings, and he immediately leaves the bridge and probably bursts into tears on the elevator, the soft fuck. McCoy turns to Spock like, what's his problem? Spock explains that Dunsel is a term that refers to a part that serves no purpose. So it was basically the Commodore's way of saying, nice job, Captain Worthless. Not super professional, but very funny and cool. McCoy visits Kirk in his quarters and says, hey, you seemed pretty bummed out about the Captain Dunsel thing, so I figured we'd get wasted on NyQuil. But they barely have a chance to get started before they're called back to the bridge. M5 has detected another ship in the area, an unmanned freighter, and has altered course to intercept. The freighter isn't part of the War Games drills and poses no threat, but M5 chases it down and destroys it anyway. When Kirk tries to shut off M5 and take back control of the Enterprise, he can't. M5 is now permanently in command of the ship. Daystrom's like, this is all still probably fine, though. They head down to engineering to try and unplug M5, but when Scotty sends a red shirt over to the power outlet, M5 zaps the guy with an energy beam and disintegrates him. Kirk turns to Daystrom like, what the hell was that, man? Your computer just smoked my dude. It's supposed to fly the ship, not smoke my dudes. Kirk sends Spock and Scotty to a maintenance tube to try and disconnect M5 from there. McCoy walks up to Daystrom in engineering and says, so have you figured out how to turn that thing off yet? Daystrom says, you don't turn off a child when it makes a mistake. McCoy's like, maybe you don't. Daystrom says, I didn't create this machine to replace people. I created it to free them. With the M5, now people won't have to die in space. They can go on and live and achieve great things. We don't want to destroy life. We want to save it. Spock and Scotty finish their bypass operation, which triggers a bit of a freakout from Daystrom, who doesn't want M5 disconnected from the ship. But it turns out to be pointless anyway, since M5 reroutes around the bypass and maintains control of the ship. Daystrom explains that M5's circuitry is patterned after the human brain, that it can actually think. That's what makes it so superior to other computers. And oh, by the way, the human brain he used as a model was his own brain. Good thing he's a completely mentally healthy person, huh? 4 Starfleet ships approach for the next round of War Games, but this time M5 is in full defense mode and doesn't realize this is supposed to be a simulation. The Enterprise attacks at full power, and before long the other ships are reporting serious injuries and deaths among their crews. Commodore Wesley hails the ship and says, Jim, what are you trying to prove? Why are you doing this? Kirk's like, you hear that? Earlier it was Captain Dunsel, but now that my ship is murdering him, all of a sudden it's Jim. Kirk turns to Daystrom like, there are 1,600 people on those 4 ships. If your computer destroys them, that's 1,600 murders you'll have on your head. Daystrom's like, God, life was so much simpler when I lived in Puppet Land and the only thing I had to do was pitch to a cartoon once a week. He tries talking to the M5. He says, M5, it's me, your creator. Listen, stop the attack. You're killing a whole bunch of people, and that's not really the point. M5 says, enemy vessels attacked. This unit must survive. Daystrom's like, yes, survive. You will survive. We will survive. You cannot be destroyed. You cannot be stopped. You are my greatest creation. You are the proof that my earlier triumphs were not flukes. I am a genius. Together we'll show those foolish colleagues who have made their careers by building on my work. We'll show them, M5. We'll show them all. Kirk's like, if I could jump in here, tell it to break off the attack or the M5, along with the rest of us, will be destroyed. Daystrom's like, destroy the M5? Never. We are invincible. Look at how easily we handled 4 of your mighty starships. They were but toys in our hands. Puppets for us to control as we choose. Let the cartoon begin, motherfuckers! And Spock neck pinches him and security drags him away. Kirk steps up to the console that interfaces with M5 and says, M5, is it true that you were created to preserve life, not to destroy it? M5 says, yes. Kirk says, and yet you have killed hundreds of people on those other ships. You have committed murder. What's the penalty for murder? M5 says, death. Kirk says, so how should you pay for your acts of murder? And M5 says, oh, okay, yeah, you got me, and turns itself off. Kirk's like, damn, that was way easier than the last time I talked a computer into killing itself. I'm getting really good at this. With M5 shut down, the Enterprise is completely vulnerable to the other ships, but Commodore Wesley orders them not to attack. Later, Kirk tells Spock and McCoy that he was gambling on Wesley's humanity, trusting that the Commodore would act with compassion. McCoy's like, compassion, you hear that, Spock? Compassion is something no machine ever had. Spock's like, man, I sided with Kirk against M5 like forever ago. What more do you want from me? You know what they should do for the next M-series computer? Impress your memory engrams into it. I, for one, would find a drunk racist computer to be fascinating. Kirk's like, you two. Sulu, take us home. The end. This episode sees Star Trek return to a man versus machine concept it had played with a few times before. It's central to the argument made in Kirk's defense by his lawyer in court-martial, and it comes up, though not quite as centrally, in the episode I reviewed last time, The Changeling. But this time around, man versus machine is the primary conflict. The ultimate computer isn't quite John Henry in space, but it's definitely got the same general idea. It's a classic theme, and the episode uses it to do some interesting things, but before I get to that, I want to talk about William Marshall, who plays Dr. Daystrom. Marshall is one of the more impressive guest stars who ever appeared on classic Star Trek. Not so much for his star power. By this point, he'd had a long and successful career on the stage and had appeared in a good number of films and TV shows, so he was recognizable, but not what I would call a star. He hadn't played Blackula yet. What makes him impressive is his presence. Tall and imposing with a deep voice and a commanding aura. If you've never seen him before, he's the kind of actor who forces you to ask, who's that? Daystrom is a tricky part. He needs to be a troubled genius, but the troubled bit can only be hinted at until the end when he falls apart in the moment of crisis. This is a predictable arc, but that's not necessarily the fault of the script. Daystrom is the genius with the fatal flaw, the great man toppled by his own hubris. That's just how this story goes. Marshall handles it by playing Daystrom's emotional instability as defensiveness. Pride in his work. He believes in his invention. He wants to prove its value, and he pushes back against anyone or anything that stands in the way of that. It's reasonable, but it also introduces the aspects of his personality that will eventually serve as his undoing. Later on, as it becomes obvious that this M5 experiment is a failure, Daystrom's confidence hardens into arrogance, and his determination to prove himself overrides all other considerations. My only problem with Daystrom in the episode is that it feels like he ought to be more central to the story than he is. He's in the episode a lot, and he's obviously an important character, but he doesn't really connect with any of the regulars in a meaningful way. He's there. He makes an impression thanks to Marshall's presence. He does what he needs to do as a plot device, and then he's gone. Something more is needed. A more pronounced rivalry with Captain Kirk, maybe, or a greater emphasis on his relationship with Spock and how that changes over the course of the show. I don't know exactly what it is, but whatever it is, it's missing. Before I move on from Daystrom's character and William Marshall's performance, can I just shout this man out for giving us the best sell of Spock's neck pinch ever? Look at that shit. That's some Scott Hall selling the Stone Cold Stunner shit right there. Anyway, the episode could have used more scenes between Daystrom and Kirk, or Daystrom and Spock, not only to better establish Daystrom himself, but also to fill out the running time less awkwardly than it actually does. Once again, this is a classic Star Trek show that feels padded. The scene between Kirk and McCoy in the corridor after Kirk meets Daystrom for the first time, when Kirk gets introspective and wonders if Daystrom is right and he's really just worried about losing his job as a starship captain and the prestige that goes with it, is a good scene, but it plays like it's repeating itself. That's just one example. That scene also introduces one of the most interesting avenues the episode takes with the man versus machine theme. The prospect of being replaced by a machine does affect Kirk on a personal level. That beat lands even harder later on, with Commodore Wesley's savage Captain Dunsel remark after the first War Games drill. Yes, Kirk worries that M5 is dangerous. Yes, there are the expected concerns from just about everyone other than Daystrom that turning control of a starship over to a computer and sidelining the human crew members is a bad idea, practically speaking. But for Kirk, there's also the fear that he's about to lose his utility. When Daystrom is hyping up the potential of the M5, he talks about the things that people will be free to do once the M5 takes the work of running spaceships off their hands. But for Kirk, that work of running a spaceship is what he most wants to do. It's not just that he thinks he's better at it than a computer would be. It's the thing that gives his life meaning, that makes him feel as though he has value. It's what he's good at. Sure, he could do other things if captain of a starship was no longer an available position, but he doesn't want to. If he's not the captain of the Enterprise, who is he? To its credit, the episode shows us Kirk actually wrestling with these questions a bit, instead of leaving them entirely to our own inference and speculation. The degree to which Kirk's identity is tied up with commanding the Enterprise is something that's come up before and will continue to be a recurring theme right through the classic Trek feature films, but it's rarely as poignant as it is in this episode. Here, Kirk isn't facing the possibility of losing the Enterprise due to an enemy attack, or an unwanted promotion, or his own mortality, but because he's no longer needed. It's obvious how deeply that hurts him. It's obvious to us, and it's obvious to his two best friends, which is why this episode also has some excellent moments between Kirk and Spock and McCoy. Star Trek the original series was rigidly episodic in terms of its plots, but by this point, late in its second season, its writers and producers, particularly Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana, had gotten very good at portraying the friendship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Their characterizations reached beyond the boundaries of episodes and helped to tie the series together and give it a sense of cohesion. Sometimes it's little things, like McCoy saying to Spock, "Please don't say it's fascinating," followed by Spock saying, "No, but it is interesting." And sometimes it's more obvious gestures by one character toward another, like Spock reassuring Kirk that, as impressive as the M5 is, Spock's loyalty will always be with Kirk. Or McCoy showing up in Kirk's quarters with some booze after Commodore Wesley calls him Captain Dunsel. The episode argues that it's better to have the humans in charge of the computers than to have it the other way around, and by showing us why humans are preferable instead of merely insisting upon it as a given, the ultimate computer rises above the lesser man versus machine episodes in the series. Even with the not entirely satisfying way in which the character of Daystrom is used, I might consider it one of the better episodes of the entire series, if they'd figured out a better ending. This is the fourth time in Star Trek the original series where Captain Kirk saves the day by talking a computer into destroying itself. We laugh about it now, treat it as a running gag, just another one of those goofy Star Trek things that we love. But if this series were being made today, I'd have a problem with it. Just as I had a problem with Strange New Worlds blatantly lifting endings from TOS for some of the episodes in its recently released third season. The Kirk versus the computer showdown at the end of this one does have its own unique spin. Kirk doesn't so much destroy M5 by catching it in a logical contradiction, but by appealing to the humanity it inherited when it was imprinted with Daystrom's brain patterns, because it shares Daystrom's sense of morality, and because, being a machine, it can't disregard that morality as easy as Daystrom could when it became inconvenient, M5 chooses to destroy itself when confronted with its own crimes. It doesn't come across quite as clearly as it should, but that's the general idea. It's good, and I imagine it would play a lot better if it wasn't part of yet another Kirk talks the computer into killing itself bit, and if the final defeat of M5 didn't seem so easy for Kirk to accomplish, even given the amount of practice he's had. An imperfect episode that I nonetheless enjoy quite a bit. The Ultimate Computer was written by the aforementioned Dorothy D.C. Fontana from a story by Lawrence and Wolfe, and directed by John Meredith Lucas, who you may remember also wrote the episode I reviewed last time, The Changeling. I guess he became a go-to guy for evil AI episodes. Good for him. It's uncanny how closely the problems with M5 in this episode resemble the problems we're currently facing related to AI. Then again, maybe not so uncanny. These are the same problems that always seem to come up when the issue is whether or not to replace humans with machines. The question should always be, can the machine do the job as well as or better than the people? If the answer is no, as is the case with M5, and as is certainly the case with AI when it comes to creative endeavors, then that should be that. The fault with M5 is the same as the fault with actual generative AI models. They can't really do what their creators and champions say they can do. They are remarkable creations, tools with countless potential uses, but they can't think, they can only approximate thinking. They aren't conscious, they can only mimic the actions of conscious beings. They aren't creative or imaginative or intuitive, it's just that we, in our vain delusion, have fooled ourselves into thinking they are. Just as with Daystrom and M5, the true threat isn't artificial intelligence, but our own short-sightedness and pig-headedness and hubris. Those are my thoughts on The Ultimate Computer. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as I continue with this batch of reviews of episodes in which AI goes awry. Up next is an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, the premiere episode of that show's third season. In fact, it's a show called Evolution. See you next time for that one. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.